Macca's Guides.
Hey everyone, Macca here, playing Halo Infinite, and in today's video, I'm going to show you how to get the most responsive controls possible and how to make yourself a better competitive player with only a couple of changes in your settings. I personally posted my settings on Twitter a couple of days ago and have been refining them since and getting a lot of positive feedback from people who have made the switch. So let's just get into it by going straight to our settings, and I'm going to be covering the controller in this video. Now for button layout, I personally use bumper jumper, but you can use whatever you want. I think making the transition to bumper jumper is difficult in the beginning, but will overall make you a better player if you have the time and dedication. For vibration, most high-level pro players have this turned off, but it is another adjustment, and that's going to be another personal preference. I'm also an inverted player, but as we scroll, we're going to get into the magic stuff. I'm going to maintain sprint and leave on auto clamber, and for the sensitivity acceleration I have it at 2, and for my sensitivity I actually have it at 4, which is lower than the default 5, but as you practice and get better you can start turning up your sensitivity. But I'm going to show you some of the more important things that are below this. Zoom sensitivity I've left at default, and it does take a little bit of adjusting, but with the other settings coming up, these are actually more than good enough. Now, move thumbstick. This is a really important one. The center dead zone, you want this number to be as low as possible, but if you make it too low, you may experience stick drift, which will mean that your character walks or aims on their own without you touching your controller. So for me, the lowest I could get it was around 3, and just to be safe, I've turned it up to 3.5, and you want this number to be as low as possible because the lower it is, the more responsive your controller is, but if you have an old and well-used controller, getting it too low won't actually work for you. Now for the move thumbstick, I have the max input threshold as a very high number at 13, and this basically means that no matter what I do with my movement stick, I'm getting 100% of that stick's kind of effect. So even if I move the left stick just a little bit, I should get 100% of the effect. And this is great for movement because it allows me to strafe very quickly left and right without having to wait for my thumbstick to try to catch up due to acceleration. Now for the axial dead zone, you can read about this one in the bottom right hand corner, and this one's actually really important. But basically this is how much you move your thumbstick to get the minimum input to register, and it'll say that the lower values feel more responsive and the higher values reduce drift. So another one where you want to turn this as low as possible without getting drift. And for me, that number is 3. And this allows me to move very quickly, strafing left and right, and very responsively. Now for the look thumbstick, we're doing a little bit of the opposite. The center dead zone and the axial dead zone are going to remain the same, meaning that I don't have a high acceleration on my thumbstick, allowing me to move very responsively when I aim, but I do have my max input threshold at 0 because I do want the acceleration curve to exist as my reticle speeds up across the screen. This allows me personally to fine-tune aim when I have to make small adjustments or snipe more easily. And these settings I think are the most important to get a responsive controller feeling. However, there are a lot more settings to go that I think make a huge difference. Now for the rest of the controller settings, I basically left them by default, and they're going to be more than good enough for you. Let's switch over to video, where field of view is at 78 by default. Personally, my sweet spot is at 82 for console gaming. PC gamers may like it really, really high, and old school Halo 3 gamers may like it really low, around 70. Personally, the bigger your field of view, the higher it is, the faster the game feels, the more you will see on screen, but the harder it can be to handle. So fine-tune that to yourself accordingly. Now for graphics quality, I always recommend going performance, although mine is grayed out because I am currently on a capture card recording this video. If you have the option between quality and performance and your TV supports high frame rates, definitely go performance. It'll make your game buttery smooth. While on the topic of TVs, make sure if your TV has a game mode that you are set in game mode. It makes a world of a difference. Now these next ones, in my opinion, are very important. Here we have blur, which basically means how blurry does your screen get when a lot of things happen on screen. When there's explosions, when you're moving, when you're turning, how blurry do things get? You don't want them to be blurry if you want to be able to see what you're looking at accurately all the time. Now, blur can make the game look better or more cinematic, but in my opinion, it just adds visual noise and makes it harder to play. Then we have screen shake. Again, this is something that might make your game look more action-packed. It might make your game look cooler, but screen shake just makes it, in my opinion, harder to play the game competitively, which is why I have it at 0%. For exposure, I have it at 20%. This is basically how bright lights can get. I still want my bright lights to be able to get bright, but just not fully bright, so we're going to have it at 20%, which is kind of my personal sweet spot there. And then for full screen effects, I have it at 50%. These are things like your shield recharging or your equipment use. You definitely don't want this at 0%, but I found that at 100%, the full screen effects were way too much visual noise for me to personally handle. When my shields were recharging and I was also getting hit, I couldn't tell where I was getting hit from because my whole screen was consumed with my shield recharging. 50% is my sweet spot. Speed lines. These are white lines that show up on your screen as you're sprinting. They are completely useless unless you are an absolute beginner. Turn these off, in my opinion. Sharpening, we're going to reach 20%. If your game is overly sharp, it can be very hard to see things in the distance. But if sharpening is at 0, everything looks soft, and then it can be very hard to distinguish depth, how far you are from certain items and where certain edges end. 20%, my sweet spot. Last but not least, we're gonna go to the UI. We need a HUD, and for HUD opacity, I like it at 0.3 or 0.4. It's gonna be a little bit more see-through than default. If you want to see your HUD better, I like it higher, but if you're playing ranked, you should know how much ammo is in your gun, and you don't have a radar, so your HUD is less important, and I like to turn it down to 0.03. Now, there are more settings here, and one that I really like is changing my enemy UI color to pineapple or sunshine. This makes them bright yellow, it makes them easy to see, it makes it easier to tell when their shields are broken or their shields are recharging, or when they're one-shot. Now, I know red versus blue is how it's always been. Pineapple is 100% the way to go. Friendly UI color, completely up to you. I like it blue, sky blue, or cerulean, whatever color you want to see. I do show enemy team names, I do show friendly names, and I do show fire team names, but for my custom game player names, I show service tag in front of gamer tag. I don't want to see someone named XX Elite Sniper 69XX. Just show me their 3 or 4 character service tag instead. And then these are also really important, the UI visual effects. You have to change these to be competitive. Now, the first option here is chromatic aberration, which is a fancy name for color distortion. If you've ever seen one of those kind of wacky 3D images where there's like a blue shift and a red shift, that's chromatic aberration, and it's made to add a visual effect to the game, which I personally think is useless. It is a little bit distracting, and I would highly recommend, if you want a cleaner looking game with easier to interpret visuals, you turn off chromatic aberration. Next up, we have the bloom visual effect, and this is not when your reticle has bloom and moves. Bloom happens when you look at a light source and you see little rings show up. You'll notice a lot of bloom, for example, in like Michael Bay movies. In my opinion, you're gonna turn it off because it just gets in the way of you seeing your gameplay. Last but not least, we have parallax, which is a fancy name for allowing 2 different parts of the screen to move at 2 different speeds. For example, if you're sniped in with your sniper rifle, inside your scope, it may be moving at 1 speed, but outside of your scope, it may be moving at a different speed. This is another visual effect, which I think looks really cool if you want an action-packed experience, but if you want to be as competitive as possible and get the most responsive feeling gameplay, you want to hit all your shots, I think parallax is useless, and I have also turned it off. Now, with all of these settings changed, go and try your game. It may look a little bit worse, it may feel a little bit less cinematic, or it may feel like a little less of an action movie, but I think your gameplay will speak for itself, and you should, with practice, get a lot better, a lot more responsive controls, and be more competitive with these settings. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope it was helpful. A special thank you to everyone on Patreon for supporting the show, and hopefully I see you soon. Peace.